California voters will soon decide their party's choices for president, and this time around it could actually mean something nationally. Will the Trump train derail in Orange County? Are OCers feeling the burn? Will Republicans vote for a moderate Democrat to be their new senator? The California primaries, next on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming. Hi, I'm Rick Reiff. Welcome to Inside OC. Well, usually the presidential primaries are all but over by the time they roll into late voting California, but not this year. The insurgent Trump and Sanders campaigns mean that it'll still be a race by the time Californians go to the polls on June 7th. So how are Californians, and more specifically OCers, going to vote? And how's the county's own Congresswoman, Loretta Sanchez, faring in her uphill race for the U.S. Senate? Well, joining me to discuss this and more, lawyer and president emeritus of the Lincoln Club of Orange County, Michael Capaldi, lawyer and former Irvine council member Chris Mears, and chair of the political science department at the University of California, Irvine, Mark Petracca. Welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you. Great to have you on.
Nice to be back. This is the team.
This is the team, and there might be some viewers out there who say this looks vaguely familiar. If we had Ed Arnold or Ann Police sitting in the middle between us, they might recall that we've done this many a time on PBS SoCal. Great to have you all back.
It sounds somewhat sad and tawdry when you put it that way, Rick.
Well, sad perhaps. I don't know about tawdry, but we'll let the viewers decide that. But speaking of tawdry, let's start off with our political science expert, Professor Mark. What in the world is going on in the political world?
Well, the reason California is going to be relevant has more to do with what's happened on the Republican side than the Democratic side. On the Republican side, what a lot of people don't appreciate is that historically, since the late 1960s, Republicans have tended to have winner-take-all primaries. That effectively created a winner much earlier on in the process, and people with memories can remember how quickly prior candidates were decided. During the period in March, however, quite a number of Republican primaries were more or less proportional in their distribution of delegates. And that's one of the things that's prevented any of the Republican candidates, including Donald Trump, from amassing the majority that they need in order to become the presumptive nominee.
Thank God.
On the Democratic side, it's true that, and I think that Hillary, when this is all over, ought to send Bernie Sanders a big basket of fruit. He's performed an absolutely crucial function for her. He's kept her in the news during what could have been an entirely Republican winter and spring with all the news about Trump and the other people running. And he's helped her hone her debating skills and campaigning skills. I think it would have been catastrophic for the Democratic Party if there had been no serious opposition to Hillary Clinton.
So how about that, Michael? The Democrats are well honed. They do seem kind of have, for all their division, they just can't wait for the general election. What's the feeling on the Republican side?
Well, on the Republican side, you've got, Mark characterized Donald Trump as a man running for the Republican nomination. Factually, that's true, but he really is a Democrat. And I think Orange County understands the difference. Look, I mean, here's a guy who, like Barack Obama, supported the stimulus program. Like Barack Obama, he supported car bailouts, right? Automobile bailouts. Big bank bailouts. He's a guy who said he's so liberal that he supports single payer for health care. Now, Republicans know the difference. Donald Trump is not one of them. In fact, Mark, one of the reasons he's ahead in the Republican primaries is that in addition to these proportionate primaries, you've got primaries that are open. So to a great degree, here is a guy who's essentially a big Democrat government guy who is winning Republican primaries on the strength of Democratic voters and independent voters. Now, Orange County knows better. I think Orange County is very quickly going to be in the camp
So
of
you
Ted
think-
Cruz, who is an authentic constitutional Republican.
But having said all that, whether Trump is a Democrat or whatever he is, he could very well, likely, in fact, be the nominee of the Republican Party.
Right, he could be. He could be. Let's hope he's not. It's going to depend a lot on how close he gets before the convention.
Doesn't that just before I get to Chris, who looks very happy over there?
Pivot to Chris.
This is an awful time for the Republican Party.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a very, very difficult time because you're possibly going to name as the nominee a guy who has got philosophically nothing to do with the Republican Party historically, and a personality that will drive people away. Republican Party is looking at the worst of both worlds, somebody who doesn't represent them and somebody who will alienate them from millennials and Latinos and women, and that's not good for the Republican Party. It's time for Orange County Republicans to rally behind a real conservative and get rid of Trump.
Chris, does your heart go out to the Republicans?
My heart bleeds for the Republicans, but to sort of take a slightly higher view of the primary process, and it's a real question actually. When is the Republican Party going to stop allowing itself to be pulled around by the ring of its nose, the ring in its nose, by the early primary season where you continue to be, the whole party continues to be driven by these small, white, conservative states that have this incredible influence over who the nominees are, who the survivors are. It happens every election cycle in and election cycle out. This is, of course, sort of the worst nightmare, I suppose, for Republicans that could happen. And the early primary setup that you have doesn't completely explain, of course, the Donald Trump phenomenon. But I think I agree with Rick. I think Donald Trump is likely to be the nominee. And while that does fill me with a certain level of terror over the possibility that Americans might actually elect an authoritarian president such as a Donald Trump, which is a polite way of saying fascism, I think it also is in large part a great thing for Democrats. It's going to adversely affect every down ballot race that exists throughout the country. Democrats will take back, clearly take back the Senate. It's an awful long bridge to take back the House in one election, but they'll make a huge dent in that. You're going to have Hillary as president of the United States, even though I'm a Bernie Sanders guy. And it's going to be a very, very interesting, and for Republicans, a very painful next 8 years.
Well, let me just add something to that. From a Republican standpoint, the Democratic Party has got some huge problems with it right now that are getting ignored because of this carnage that's happening in the Republican Party. But you're about to give the nomination to a person with the highest negatives of any political candidate for a major party, except for Donald Trump. But I'm telling you, if you look at the passion behind your guy Bernie Sanders, and you look at the sort of deadening, zombie-like following that Hillary Clinton's got, she is a candidate in trouble. And the reason most people don't realize it is that Donald Trump tends to take all of these headlines.
I don't disagree with you, by the way. Go ahead.
Well, a couple of things that are interesting about the election in historical perspective. This is an open election, which means there's no incumbent from either party that's seeking election. The president is not running for re-election. The vice president is not, although could have, seeking re-election. And historically, that normally has created some level of chaos in both parties as they sort out on the incumbent party side, who do we get to replace the incumbent party? Very hard to win a third term in the 20th century and now the 21st century. On the Republican side, if you had taken Trump out of the equation, if Trump had never run, or if he had crashed and burned as virtually everybody predicted he would during the summer, how many more groups of people could he insult before he would be done? Hasn't happened yet. I think you'd have quite a number of additional Republican candidates would still be in it now. I think Trump has taken so much oxygen out of the media and out of political interest. Even when people are beating up on Trump, as you see regularly now, for months you've seen it, they're still talking about Trump.
Right.
We're still talking about Trump. No one has actually, and you mentioned Cruz's name once only. Somebody can count how many times we've already mentioned the name of Trump. I think you're wrong about Trump being a Democrat. I think Trump is a total political opportunist who will say whatever it is necessary to whatever audience he's speaking before in order to get them to like him.
Well, Mark, let's follow that line, because I think there's some things, besides all these technical things we've been talking about, some real changes in the electorate and in the whole political process of the United States. For example, George W. Bush. George W. Bush, remember when he first ran, he was against nation building, all right? He wanted immigration reform, and there were many Republicans. It was the Democrats at that time who were more resistant to immigration reform. Today, can you imagine a Republican who doesn't subscribe to some form of nation building, who isn't wanting to build the higher wall on immigration? Michael is one when it comes to immigration, but I mean, that's where the party is now. On the Democrats, Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was for NAFTA, for free trade. Bill Clinton signed a crime bill. He signed welfare reform. What Democrat today would subscribe to any of those things? Mark, it seems like the whole political map has changed.
It has, but it's been a long-term process of changing. The other example I'd throw into the mix, which we were talking about the other day, is that when Ronald Reagan was governor of this state, he was in favor of gun control.
Right.
Can you imagine a Republican running for the president who would be in favor of serious gun control?
So why is that?
Well, times have changed, and a gap has been created between, I think, on both sides, what people thought they were going to get, not necessarily what they were promised. Obama didn't actually promise very much when he ran. Clinton, when he ran originally in 1992, didn't promise very much when he ran. But there's a gap between what people thought they were going to get and what's actually transpired. And the biggest umbrella, I think, to put all this under, and the polling substantiates this or supports this, is the decline of the middle class, which is such a large percentage of the American population. This problem, decline in real income, the decline in buying power, and all the things that are not just remnants of what happened in 2007, 2008, but go back 20 years before that. Those issues, some of which have been picked up by Trump, some of which have been picked up by Bernie Sanders, interestingly. They share language about a number of those questions. That's what seems to be motivating people.
You know, Michael Moore, and I'm a huge fan of the filmmaker Michael Moore, as you might imagine. I know that won't come as a big surprise. But the thesis of his film Capitalism was that we don't have a democracy, we have an economy. And I think, to Mark's point about why we are seeing some of the things that we are seeing, it appears we may be reaching a tipping point. We may. These things may, a few years from now, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders may look like flashes in the pan, but they may not. They may represent the harbinger of some very, very profound change in society, where the mass of people who are no longer middle class have joined the people who have never been middle class. And their anger has coalesced in such a way that it really portends a long-lasting and very significant shift. I think that we all, I listen to us for that matter, and I also listen to other pundits who there's a tendency to try and understand things through the same lens, through the same paradigm of political understanding and analysis. I'm not sure that the train of this movement hasn't already left the station, and we are witnessing something that represents a very profound shift in American society and politics.
Michael, I wonder if we're dealing now with a campaign with such shallow but emotionally compelling ideas or slogans and celebrity candidates. We had Schwarzenegger as the governor, now Donald Trump running for president. Is politics turning into a reality show?
Yeah, unfortunately, and I think that's one of the reasons Donald Trump is so effective. When you think about him, you think about this real estate mogul. The fact is, he has been a reality television star for 15, 16, 17 years. And he has been in front of the camera, and he's more comfortable than anybody. Think Ronald Reagan was an actor, right? And he was elected. Oh my gosh, we're electing an actor. Donald Trump has had more time in front of a camera by multiples of 40 or 50 times than that Ronald Reagan does. So absolutely, celebrity and brand is absolutely everything. And right now, along the point you're making, if you look at the top 4 candidates, both on the Republican side, Democratic side, 3 out of 4 of them are running as serious, iconoclastic, anti-establishment candidates. That says something really profound about this election. Ted Cruz is really disliked by the, quote, Republican establishment in Washington, D.C. for standing them up from the moment he got elected to the moment, he ran for president.
Let me say one other thing here. Unlike, we've been in these moments before in American political history, albeit without the influence of the media, which is very important to take into consideration. But I don't think that any of these candidates, maybe with the exception of Bernie Sanders, represents what we would call movement politics. This is all politics of personality, and I would include Cruz in that group as well. And the consequence of that going forward is, win or lose, whatever support there is for these people are not relevant anymore. I mean, once they've lost, they go back to doing whatever it was that they were doing.
Sarah Palin.
They're Sarah Palin. They make.
Although they might get a reality show.
They might get a reality show. They might get asked to be on talking head shows, but they're not going to create movements.
Okay.
I've got to say, it's just on the subject of Cruz. Cruz is a product of the Tea Party movement, which has been pivotal since 2010. He's not going anywhere, and the Tea Party movement is.
Yeah, Cruz. I think I agree with that. All right, now before we move on, because we do have a state race that I want to talk about, but just very quickly, I want your 2-word answer. Who will be the 2 winners, Republican, Democrat, in the presidential primary in California? Chris.
Well, I think it's a complex answer. It's a complex
analysis. No, it's not. It's Hillary or Bernie or.
I think it's Hillary, and I think it's Trump.
Okay, Mark.
Trump and Clinton.
Hillary and Cruz. I think Cruz is going to pull this out.
Okay, how interesting. Okay. Professor Mark, tell us about this fascinating race that's going on for the U.S. Senate to fill the Barbara Boxer seat. Barbara's leaving after many, many years as the senator from California. So,
you have
what's going on?
The person who's in the lead is Kamala Harris, who's a statewide elective office holder, and she's being challenged by Loretta Sanchez, who is our local congresswoman. This is one of these instances, and it's happened before over the last 40 years, in which the absence of any serious local originated broadcast TV out of Orange County is having a negative effect on Sanchez's campaign. People don't know who she is.
Right, she is the congresswoman from Santa Ana.
She's the congresswoman from Santa Ana, and the people in Santa Ana may know that, and some people more within the immediate area know that, but people in Northern California don't know that very much. Everybody knows who Kamala Harris is. Because of the election rules that we have, involving the election of non-presidential delegates, this is an election in which it's possible that both of them could end up being the top 2 vote getters in the primary, and that they could go on to then face off again in the November election. But the hill that Sanchez has to climb here, even if she were an extraordinarily talented campaigner, and I'll leave it to others to judge whether or not that's the case, is made all that much harder by her lack of name identification. And the reason for that lack of name identification is that other than your shows, we don't have much original news coming out of this county, and that hurts both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side, candidates from Orange County running for statewide office.
Well, Michael, I want to get Michael's opinion here, because of course there are some Republicans who are running for the Senate too. And just so viewers keep in mind, the primaries in California are now open, which means it's a top 2 finishers. A lot of people are almost assuming now that it will be Kamala Harris and Loretta Sanchez, 2 Democrats advancing. Do you agree with that?
Right. Well, listen, I think there are certain facts of life that you just have to accept. And there are 2 about California. One is that it's a heavily Democratic state. No surprise, but it's true. The other is that it is impossible for a candidate who isn't already known to magically create name ideas, as Mark is suggesting. You've got 5 or 7 major media markets in the state, and to make an impact on every one of them, very, very difficult. And if Loretta Sanchez has a problem as a sitting Democratic congresswoman, the Republicans are going to have an even greater problem and a much higher hill to climb.
Yeah,
so I don't think it's going to happen.
If you actually look at the data,
you're saying it's not going to happen, that a Republican will get in.
I think you're going to have two Democrats vying for in the general election.
And what about a lot of talk that a lot of Republicans, if not officially, unofficially, are saying that, you know what, we might as well choose the lesser of two evils, and Loretta Sanchez, a little more moderate Democrat than Kamala Harris, will get our votes.
Yeah, that's a real inside baseball philosophy, and I think for most Republicans, most of the time, there's no real difference, between two folks on the left. I mean, between Loretta and Kamala, there's 3 degrees difference, and you're not going to get Republicans excited enough to go focus after Loretta Sanchez. It's just not going to happen.
I think there are some differences. Maybe we'll get into those. But Chris, what's your feeling about this race?
Well, it's hard to disagree with anything Mark and Mike have said. What occurs to me, though, and as I was thinking about this very issue, is that there are millions of voters here in California who live in the southern half of the state, who cycle in and cycle out, are shut out of statewide elections, effectively shut out, with the exception of a Pete Wilson, but effectively shut out from the process because of the number of people who live in Northern California and the extent to which that drives who gets elected to many of these offices. Here we're the most populous state in the United States, and we have as many U.S. senators as North Dakota, as Wyoming. Pick a state.
It's called federalism.
It's called federalism, but there is something so fundamentally unfair about this, and there's something fundamentally unfair, not to Loretta Sanchez personally, although I think it's unfair to her as well. There's something that's so unfair to the voters in Southern California who find themselves always facing this impossibly high hurdle of electing a candidate to statewide office or to a federal office who is from Southern California.
Chris, I'm glad you brought that up, and I'll throw it to you, Professor, because that's one of the things I wanted to get to, Michael, where I think there are differences. I've had Loretta on the show, and she's already kind of outlined what her strategy would be. And one is that she's the Southern California candidate. We don't have any state officials from Southern California. They're all Northern California. And she's also played the water thing, that in Northern California, Kamala Harris isn't going to be for building reservoirs. She is. We're in a drought in Southern California. She's also the Latina candidate. They won't turn out that much in the primary, but in the general, you'll get more Latinos. Does she have do you see a path for her to win? She's the uphill candidate right now.
Well, she can win, but to win in this state, now this takes me back to Michael's observation that California is an overwhelmingly Democratic state. It's actually not on the basis of party registration. There are fewer Democrats proportionally in California today than there were 20 years ago. What is different about California is that while Democratic registration has stayed more or less flat with a slight decline, Republican registration has gone down. The big winner has been independent candidates. And so the question is, Sanchez's pathway to victory is to mobilize independents. And to mobilize independents, not during the primary, because I think she'll make it to the general.
But she might not. But she might not.
It's possible that she won't. But if she does make it, to mobilize those independents in a November election in which it's possible that the top of the ticket is represented by Clinton and Trump.
Very good.
How much?
All right,
how many
and
Republicans
that is
are
it.
going to
You
turn
get
out?
the last word, Professor. Gentlemen, it's so great to get back together, and let's do it again.
It makes me.
Thank you.
It makes me a little verklempt to be here.
I'm verklempt too.
Yeah.
Just before I close, I do want to say that I've lost a friend, and so has this show. Chapman University economist Essie Adibi has died of a massive stroke at age 63. He was the go-to guy on the Orange County economy, and his annual forecast, which he presented with the university president, Jim Doty, was part lecture, part showbiz, and it all was packed Segerstrom Center. He was my guest 10 times on this show, most recently this past December. He always brought knowledge, wit, and compassion. And here he is 3 years ago discussing the minimum wage with labor official Connie Leyva. His remarks still relevant.
cycle. So we want the good cycle where everybody has enough money to spend in the community
Essie,
they
when
live
people
in.
are making economic arguments, I can see you chomping at the bit. But in a way, isn't that true that, like, especially for the poor people, you give them money, boom, they spend it, it goes back into the economy. What do you make about of this whole argument?
Well, first I want to say that I agree. Nobody can live on $10 or $15. I have no question on that. It's very difficult. And the only way they can increase really true earning power is what you said, education. And people who are working at minimum wage typically are not highly educated. But as an economist, every time you make something more expensive, people would use or buy less of it.
Right.
So we are basically bettering off people at the higher minimum wage at the expense of the others. And I think one thing you should remember, we just saw this tape about South LA. A business wants to borrow money and start a business, he has to show a business plan. He has to say how many people he has to hire.
Right.
Can he justify at those kind of wages to survive in that environment?
Do you think
I
it's
doubt
different,
it.
though, if everyone has the same floor, if everyone has the minimum wage?
Oh yeah, it is. Let me use one example.
Okay.
Let's say, I don't want to use any particular business, but fast food industry, the larger one. They can use automation, right? They could reduce less labor hours and produce as much more, but mom and pop cannot use that. And those people are going to get hurt by higher minimum wage. And again, don't take me wrong, I think even 15 you cannot live on it, you know. But when you look at the economy, I mean, as a whole, I believe the only way people can earn more is via being more productive and education. And that's the only way you can make it.
To Dr. Adibi's widow, Gila, and the entire Adibi family, our condolences. Well, that's it for now. Thanks again to my guests, Michael Capaldi, Chris Mears, and Mark Petracca. You can watch this show and past shows by going to pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by 5 Point. 5 Point is an independent real estate development company with assets under management across California. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.